Good morning. My name's Jaden Braves, and I'm the founder and CEO of the Young Politicians of Canada. We cannot start today without doing what is right, a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge we are hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. YPC is a youth-led organization, nonpartisan, nonprofit, and dedicated to ensuring young voices and young Canadians are heard within democracy and politics. We're here today because young Ontarians are not being considered in the decisions of the future. But we're here to speak directly to policymakers, parties, MPPs, and candidates about how they can amplify the needs and the justifications for the future of young people in Ontario. In this province's history, outlook has rarely been this bad for young Ontarians. Young Ontarians are facing a number of crises, and I don't use that word lightly. We're here to ensure those challenges are getting tackled, and young Ontarians are ready for the next election. It's a privilege to be representing young Ontarians today and discussing what priorities of youth in this province can be amplified and continued. While the cost of living is rising, youth are being crushed by rising rents, high food prices, and unreliable wages, while job availability is becoming more and more limited. 75% of youth in Ontario are concerned about the high prices of living, while 17% of students are at high risk of losing a roof above their heads. Ontario has some of the highest tuition fees in Canada, averaging $9,400, and students are graduating with significant debt. Meanwhile, there's a $2 billion shortfall in provincial education funding, leaving secondary schools and elementary schools in the blind for when they'll be able to function normally. Ontario and young people are calling for bold leadership on climate action. We don't want public places sold. We're seeing $30 million of Ontarian taxpayers' money going towards reversing climate action, while most young people in Ontario want a more robust and dedicated climate plan so we can feel like the future is being considered. A green economy is being considered. Sustainability is being considered. Take a look at the government's own Ontario Climate Change Impact Assessment. It acknowledges that the work of the government so far is not sufficient to address the climate crisis. Young Ontarians need to see that in the platforms of parties, MPPs, and candidates going into the next election. Ontario is experiencing a mental health crisis, and once again, I know we hear that word crisis a lot, but it has a lot of meaning. Take a listen to the statistics. 1 in 5 students in Ontario are suffering from mental health challenges. That's from CAMH. Meanwhile, 18% of Ontarians have had suicidal ideation in the past year. By no means is that acceptable for Ontario, for the province, or for the future. We want to ensure parties, MPPs, and candidates, once again, are up to the priorities and the needs of young Ontarians, and we're seeking to build a stronger collaboration between engagement with young people, provincial leaders, and students across Ontario. I'm pleased to turn it over to Teresa Thabit-Elias.
Thank you, Jaden. My name is Teresa Thabit-Elias, and I am proud to represent YPC Ontario today. I'll be walking you through the 5 key priorities that have come directly from the voices of young Ontarians. Ontario is facing an affordability crisis, with youth at the center. Many are students or entry-level workers, overwhelmed by rising costs of rent, groceries, and necessities. In 2024, nearly 60% of young adults aged 20 to 35 are worried about affording housing. Meanwhile, universities face the highest tuition fees in Canada, averaging $9,406 for undergraduates, alongside a $2 billion shortfall in provincial education funding. This financial strain leaves Ontario graduates with more debt than other provinces. We urge the province to stabilize housing, support youth financially, and boost education funding to foster long-term growth. As we face economic challenges, we cannot ignore the growing environmental crisis. Climate change effects are worsening, amplified by Ontario's 2018 rollback of climate policies, including the cap-and-trade program, which slowed emissions reduction and missed economic opportunities. Weak environmental protections and delayed climate assessments have increased ecosystem risks and resilience. Youth across Ontario call for bold action on clean energy and sustainable infrastructure to prevent rising environmental and economic costs for future generations. We must address the intertwined crisis of youth mental health struggles and rising hate crimes. Nearly half of Ontario students in grades 7 to 12 reported moderate to severe psychological distress in 2023, with many citing anxiety, depression, and lingering effects from the COVID-19 pandemic. Alarmingly, 18% considered suicide in the past year, and 42% who sought help didn't know where to turn. Meanwhile, hate crimes remain a critical issue, with 2,384 incidents reported across Canada in early 2024, nearly 60% targeting race or ethnicity. These challenges demand urgent investments in accessible mental health services and targeted interventions to protect vulnerable youth and build a safer, more inclusive future. These priorities are not just hopes, they are necessities. It's time for real action from our political leaders to build a better Ontario for youth today and tomorrow, ensuring that no young person is left behind. By addressing these urgent issues, we can create a province where every youth has the opportunity to thrive and contribute to a brighter future for all.
Thank you, Teresa. My name is Simon Leonidas, and as the co-chair of YPC Ontario, I am here to speak about how these policies can be turned into actionable priorities and how we, as a youth-led organization, are ready to collaborate with provincial leaders. These calls to action are not abstract ideas, but rather are grounded in evidence and consultation, providing a clear path forward for the province. The cost of living in Ontario is unsustainable. The Canadian dream of home ownership is increasingly out of reach, while rental costs across the province continue to outprice low-income earners. Living in Ottawa, I know many who struggle to afford rent and often have to make compromises between their health, debt, and a roof over their head. Today, standing in Toronto, a city with one of the highest rental averages in Canada, this issue is particularly pronounced. As such, we recommend the province provide expanded rental assistance for youth and work with municipalities to ensure affordable housing developments. Next, post-secondary institutions across the province are struggling, while tuition rates continue to be a significant financial strain for many Ontarians. As such, the next administration must commit towards continuing the current tuition freeze, while increasing university and college funding to ensure these critical institutions can thrive. We also call for the expansion of bursary programs for students in low-income families so that everyone can afford an education. Third, climate change is real and threatens long-term environmental, economic, and social damage. To mitigate its effects and secure Ontario's future prosperity, investments in clean and renewable energy, the reduction of carbon emissions, and sustainable infrastructure development are urgently needed. However, this must be matched with accountability, and we call for the establishment of public reporting mechanisms to track progress on emissions reductions. Among youth, suicide rates and declining mental health should be treated as the crisis it is. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among young Canadians. And those living in Ontario's poorest households are more likely to indicate that they have seriously contemplated suicide. Ontario needs to fund more mental health clinics specifically targeted at youth, reduce wait times, and subsidize counseling services for young people to help them access the help that they need. As a youth-led organization, we are eager to work with provincial leaders to ensure these policies are implemented. We welcome MPPs, candidates, and all parties to engage with us and hear directly from youth about these critical issues. Together, we can build an Ontario that prioritizes well-being, education, and the future of its young people. Thank you very much.
We'll be available for media interviews, questions, and discussions with MPPs, candidates, journalists, and policymakers to discuss the priorities of young Ontarians going into this election today, tomorrow, and the coming weeks. Thank you very much.